right, I'm gonna see if I can turn my music down here so we can get started. Um, all right. So thank you everyone who has joined us today. We're gonna go ahead and get started if I can make sure my slides are working. Um, Welcome to another Donut Office Hours. So this one we're calling this the Great Re-engagement. So we are going to be talking a little bit about some things that are going on in regards to disengagement and burnout. And today we are partnering with Josh Levine from Great Mondays. So
Hello.
yes, hi Josh. I'll give you a second to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do in just a moment. But first, some quick housekeeping things. Today, we are going to be emailing the slides and a recording of the webinar, so you don't have to try and take notes on everything while we're chatting. But we will be emailing that out. If you are chatting in the Zoom chat, please share to panelists and attendees so that everyone can benefit from the conversation. I think by default it may just go to panelists. We are going to have closed captioning enabled for the program, so you can turn that on Zoom if you need that. And also be sure to add your questions to the Q&A, and we will answer that at the end. So at the end, when we're calling for questions, be sure to actually look for that button that says Q&A. So those are all of our quick housekeeping things. So Josh, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Yes, thanks for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun. So I am an author and founder of Great Mondays, which is a culture consulting group for hypergrowth technology organizations. And my mission in life is to spread the word about the importance of company culture for businesses and the people who make them run, which are the employees. So everything I do is all about supporting that mission.
Very cool. Well, we're super excited to have you here. I know this is going to be a great conversation for those who haven't joined an office hours before. My name is Courtney, and I have a little bit of a hybrid role at Donut. I spend part of my time in customer experience, talking to customers like yourselves about different programs, maybe different things you're trying to solve in your organization, how you can do that with Donut. And I also spend part of my time focused on employee experience internally here at Donut. So thinking about many of the same questions you all may have about, how does this impact my company and my team members, and how can we help them? So I'm gonna dive right in. We like to keep this pretty interactive. So in the chat, would love to hear your name and your favorite Halloween tradition. So, feel free to also shout out where you're tuning in from if you like. And I think it's always fair for us to start. So Josh, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Do you have a
I was
favorite
going to type it
Halloween
in, but yeah,
tradition?
sure. I'll do it. I'm calling in from Portland. Halloween is I just have such fond memories from elementary school. We would have this like parent made haunted hallway. And I just feel like that is so good. And then the tradition is like you blindfold the kids and then have the different things you're supposed to feel. So like the cold spaghetti is like the brains, and then the peeled grapes is the eyeballs. I don't know. That's making those experiences for my kids is the thing that I just cherish so much.
That is so fun. I see some people shouting some good ones out in the chat. Some mulling wine, Halloween TV specials, carving pumpkins. Um, on mine, I think is just like picking the perfect pumpkin. Bonus points if you can do it at like a pumpkin patch. I grew
The
up in
actual
Alabama.
the actual picking from the ground, not the
Yes,
picking.
yes.
Yeah.
I grew up in Alabama, so pumpkin patches were pretty easy to come by. I actually worked at a pumpkin patch for one season and like took kids out on the hay rides and taught them about the crops. So I don't know, there's just something about finding the perfect big round pumpkin, or if you like a tall one, I don't know, and then taking it home to either carve it or paint it. So
Mhm.
fun. Well, thank you everyone for sharing some of your favorite Halloween traditions as well. So just a quick agenda to kind of orient all of us and we kind of know where we're headed. So we're in the middle of our intros. We're going to give you a quick overview from each of us on kind of what we do and what we're all about. And then we're just going to have a very casual fireside chat to talk a little bit about what's going on in the world and how can we approach, some of the hurdles that are maybe in front of us, and how do we imagine a more engaged workforce for the future. We do have a couple very specific sort of re-engagement case studies. We're going to talk about some of those common things you may see where people may be experiencing burnout or getting disengaged, and how you can maybe approach those in a few different ways. And then we should have a good chunk of time at the end for your audience questions. So again, you can drop them at any point in the Q&A or the chat, and we're gonna save some time at the end to really go into those and wrap up. All right. So I'll start real quick for those of you who are joining who maybe are newer to Donut. If you're just not as familiar, Donut is really all about building community, and we do that in a variety of different ways. We have some different examples of programs that you can run with Donut on the screen here. Just to shout out a few of my personal favorites. DEI, so using Donut to really promote diversity, equity, inclusion conversations and spaces where people can talk about those kinds of things. Building opportunities for mentorship or allyship. Of course, fun social connection. I'm here in my Halloween gear today. I'm all about, bringing your full self to work, being a little silly. So I love that one of the big things we do at Donut is help people make space to do those kinds of things and facilitate some socializing within your regular work week. And things like leadership lotteries as well. So making sure that leaders are connecting with other leaders and connecting with people within the organization. So we've made over 6 million intros across 15,000 teams and growing, among some that you may recognize. So that's just a little blurb about Donut if you're newer to Donut and not as familiar with what we do. So Josh, I'll let you tell us a little bit more about Great Mondays.
Sure. I found the idea, I didn't discover it myself, but came into the idea of company culture as a really critical piece of business almost about 15 years ago. And there was not a lot of literature about it. There wasn't a lot of understanding around what it is. So I dug in and with some colleagues of mine created the 6 components of company culture to help organizations actually create and manage their own company culture. I was so passionate about it. I wrote a book about it. So it's right here. Lots of fun exercises and graphics to share with your teams. And the reason I've done a number of engagements or partnerships with Donut, and the reason is because Donut does such an amazing job of filling in and helping with both recognition and rituals, which is some of the hardest stuff to actually get your culture to, hardest stuff to do to get your culture really engaged. So that's what I love about Donut. Also, yeah, sure. We can talk about cues for sure. I think let's get into it. And then maybe at the end when we have some examples, you can go to my website. All the definitions and everything are for free. The copy is for free, but I've got a lot of exercises for free at greatmondays.com. So if we don't get to it, Harriet, you can check it out there or just shoot me an email and we can chat.
Awesome. So in the chat, I just would like to know who is here today. So if you don't mind dropping in the chat, how would you describe your role? Are you an individual contributor, a manager, leader, or exec, consultant, something else we haven't put on here? But just kind of shout that out really quick so that we can kind of get a sense for who is on the call today with us, and we can kind of, tailor a little bit maybe of what we're going to talk about and think about as you all are submitting Q&A, how we can maybe make this conversation more productive for you. So I see some leaders, consultants, HR, we've got some people ops folks, executive assistant. Oh, we've got some individual contributors, managers. So we got a pretty good mix on the call today. Thank you all. Okay, so this call I know is going to fly by, so I want to dive into the
yeah let's get going. Come on,
meet and start chatting. So we're going to talk a little bit first about I don't know, the heavy stuff, chronic stress, burnout, and disengagement. And I believe I apologize, I haven't actually told everyone, but you may have seen Alex is in the chat. Alex is on our marketing side here at Donut, and she's launching this poll right now about engagement because we want to see how much energy do you have for work today, right now. So thinking about the here and now, kind of how are you feeling? And it's anonymous, so you can be truthful and tell us how you're feeling.
I just tried to click on it and it says hosts and panelists can't vote. So we can't skew. I can't skew the I can't skew the
Can't skew the
results.
results. Can't tell people how
Oh,
you're feeling.
yeah.
Um, all right. So, while I moved my poll out of the way, so now I can't actually see what people are saying in this moment, but I did see quite a few that were hitting, maybe more on the scale on the side of the disengagement and burnout side, which is, I'm glad people are being honest and saying, I'm feeling burned out. I don't have as much energy. So based on that, I think we can already say we don't really have to do a huge introduction to what it maybe feels like to be
Right, exactly.
experiencing some burnout. So, it's coming up a lot. It's something we're seeing everywhere. We're seeing the great resignation. Oh, it's burnout, mental health. How do we deal with this? So Josh, I'd love to kind of start by getting your take, since you've been working with companies on company culture for a long time. Does this moment feel different than maybe conversations around disengagement in the past and burnout? And if so, why? Why does this feel different?
Yeah, it is definitely different, and the big change, which is not going to be a surprise to anybody, is a collective experience of burnout. I think when we think about the construct of a great resignation, we are really thinking about how everybody is being impacted in a similar way. Previously, before burnout did exist, and it was definitely something that occurred, some more in other industries.
Mhm.
And mostly the tendency to see the patterns was within the organization itself. So if you're in a call center, right, that's high burnout territory. So there's
Right.
going to be tendencies in particular industries or particular companies. And so the issue was, how do we fix it at our company? But now what we're seeing is the opportunity or the influence of an external factor in causing or accelerating burnout. And so I think that makes this situation very different than previously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I don't know about everyone else on the call, but I think even just hearing us talk about it so much, there's sort of mixed reactions or emotions to that, where some of it actually compounds the problem or makes it feel heavier because it's like, oh gosh, everyone's experiencing this, and like, I'm tired. But I think there's also an element of benefiting from the fact that everyone is talking about it, and that it's not just in this
Exactly.
one department, or
Yep.
happening on a small scale where you can kind of just try to pretend to ignore it. Um, you know, as we're thinking about all the different things that might be causing what people are feeling, I think maybe the initial reaction early on, like once companies maybe kind of got past the immediate, like, okay, everything is shifting, everything is changing, what do we do now?
Mm,
Um, there was a tendency to kind of yo-yo back and forth between like how much is there that we can address, and how much is there that we maybe is not our problem. Have you seen that? And what do you think the answer to that is? Because like there's a whole lot of different stuff happening in the world, and some of it's happening in our office and some of it is happening outside.
yeah, I listened to part of the preparation for this. I listened to a podcast about burnout, and one of the history of burnout. It used to be perceived as the individual's problem. And the big shift when that term actually emerged and became embraced as an actual term that we all understood, it was like, oh, like I said before, it is industry problem. It is a company problem.
Mhm.
Um, the shit we're now seeing another shift, which is it is actually a community or societal problem. And that is really what we need to adjust our understanding around what needs to be fixed or what we can influence. Now, we can't change the pandemic. We
Mhm.
can't, there are things out there that we can't change, but that is not an excuse for saying that's not my problem, because we are all the essentially the rubber meets the road here is I'm coming in exhausted mentally, physically, and I can't give my best self. And so the focus should be what how can we as an organization help alleviate some of the factors Sometimes they're internal, sometimes they're external. And so the for me the what I think about leading organizations that are addressing this, they're thinking about um, the stuff on the inside, but also what support can I provide,
Mm,
and how to make that argument for supporting people in other ways. The example that a lot of organizations provided at the, as the pandemic wore on, was like mental health services.
right.
And that, that could be internally or externally driven, however it is, but you really saw a rise in that um, level of support, acknowledging we're all going through this. So if there's a silver lining, it's really about that, like waking up and going, for leaders to wake up and
Yeah.
really go, oh, how do we help these humans that happen to show up at our workplace?
Absolutely. And I think that's another area where sort of that collective conversation was like just massively impactful, because you
Huge.
see you see other people and then you're like, wait a minute, we aren't doing that. Maybe we should be doing that. My people are also feeling this. Um, are there any other examples you can think of in terms, as we're just kind of thinking about like what are
Mhm.
the internal and external factors? What are the ones we can control, right? Because I think there's this focus on sometimes there's really obvious ones that we can control. And I don't know, I'm not going to make the argument that like offering more mental health services was obvious. Maybe it should have been, but if it were, I feel like maybe it would have been a long time ago. So
Right.
are there other examples you can think of? I don't know, any stories of anyone you've worked with of how they just on either a small or a large scale set a tone of like, we're supporting you in a new way, or like we are we're trying to do what we can based on the facts in front of us.
Yeah. So the best story that I have, one of my clients, the CEO, within a few months of the pandemic, almost immediately, CEO of a global biotech company, 16,000 employees. He incredible CEO because he has so much empathy. He said across the board, I understand this is hard. No
Mhm.
one is going to be laid off. No one is going to be laid off during the pandemic. And what that provided was when I was what sort of thinking about putting money in the culture bank. And everybody went, okay, now I can focus on my job.
Yeah.
And to me, there's that. I think it was a really incredible sort of investment in long term thinking, because you're going to have other leaders who go, well, I don't know. I mean, oh, are they going to order as much? We're going to have to pay all these humans are very expensive. We
Mhm.
might have to cut that. But what that did was everybody said, great, now I can invest in that. And they are coming out of the pandemic on the other end, and they have had the best year, and so they're really accelerating out. And when we did our research for the organization, everybody mentioned that key culture story moment. Everybody was like, it's why I'm here.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I'm here, and I just so appreciate it. So that is, I would say, is now the gold standard
Right.
for
With people.
investment in making that simple decision. Really changed everything for that one company.
Yeah, gosh, what a weight lifted off your shoulders, when you've got a million and one things that you're stressed about, many of which we ourselves cannot control. And that's one that you're, kind of looking over your shoulder, worried about. And now, just to be able to feel like, okay, now I can really focus on what I can do successfully and how can I show up at work and contribute to the business goals as well, because I'm not as worried about that one thing.
Yep.
So, as we're thinking about what are all the different things that companies can do in terms of what they can control, I think it's important, to acknowledge that every company is different. I know you know that because you work with a lot of different clients.
Sure.
And what works for one company might not work for another. So what are some other points maybe in the employee life cycle that we can think about, that sort of like open the door to rethinking our approach, to getting people engaged? Because maybe your company's already gone through layoffs. Maybe you had to do that. So what are some things, what are some opportunities in the life cycle that you can think of that might allow us to deliver more value, excitement, and engagement?
Yeah, one of the discussions that I've been noticing percolating a little bit more um, in some organizations is this idea of re re-recruitment.
Mm,
And when we think about an employer value proposition and creating an employer value proposition, we think about, or the best ones are more than just the kind of basics of pay and bennies. You've got to talk about the kinds of people that work there, the relationships that you might make, why you're there, what is the purpose of this organization, what impact you're having. Great, I've convinced you, I've sold you on it, and then
right.
I have to, and then that's great, we just put the EVP away and then we just assume people are working. What we have found, or a lot of research has found, is that connecting deeper to the purpose of an organization is one of the most powerful ways people can draw meaning and energy from a job. So what an organization needs to do is remind people
Mhm.
this is what we're doing here.
Yeah.
And so in the employee life cycle, if we're thinking about, you know, not just a point, but thinking through this all the time. When I think about the work that I do with my clients and think about starting with purpose, it is the challenge is not just defining that purpose, but reinstating and or restating that purpose and making sure that organizations are articulating that and getting those employees to remember that's why they're here. That's why you showed up, and
Right.
that will really help. So that's I think the big one I've noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I even think back to my own experience over the last several years of my career, I think some of the moments that I can remember, I mean, I'm going to be honest, I've experienced burnout, is, when I was somehow through one way or another able to reconnect with like, oh, my work matters. What I do is contributing to something larger than, just, okay, I got to get through this project. It's a slog, okay, check, we did it. And so I think that's a huge point, to think about what does re-recruitment mean. And another thing that I also that I think about, just because I happen to have a few people in my social sphere that this has happened to over the last year. Some people were killing it, right? Like we talked about all this productivity that was actually really high, early on in the pandemic, and they got promotions and they were really excited about it. And I think their job, their companies felt like, great, this person's engaged, they're going to stay engaged, and they got a promotion, and then they were overwhelmed. And then they felt the burnout. And I based on at least what I've heard from some of those people, I wonder if there was maybe a little bit of a lack of sort of that re-recruitment, that retying it, to the what is the purpose, what drives this forward, how are you impacting that,
Yeah.
and almost sort of re-onboarding them, in a way to, here's why this matters, here's why you matter at the company, and not just, great, here's a pile of work, please keep chugging along.
Yeah. Well, I think ultimately, I mean, one of the things that we are talking about here without actually talking about it is the difference in perception about what the employee wants versus what the employer thinks that they want.
Mhm.
And I want to bring up there was a study by McKinsey that just came out around the difference between those and sort of what was most important. So they have the overlap of the most important together. They both employees and employers understand. So work-life balance was one of those.
Mhm.
So that makes sense. Something we talked about. Um, Also, everybody talked about feeling engaged or being overburdened. You just talked about an unmanaged workload. But employers think that it's about compensation. They think people are looking for a better job, but that did not pop up for employees. Employees, the number one thing that employees said that employers didn't understand is being valued by the organization. And this is one of the key elements of a culture, full stop, which is recognition. What are you being recognized for? Thank you for the impact you have on your team. Thank you for what you're doing for the organization. And you can't. It doesn't have to cost anything. You
Right.
just have to ask your manager, or for if you're a people manager, you know, remind people, hey, look, these people are working really hard. Please personally acknowledge them with specific and measurable, attainable, time-bound goals. Right? Like
Yeah.
those, thank you so much, Courtney, for stepping up and showing up. That little bit is goes a long way. And so to me, what this means is organizations need to realize that they need to invest in this, and more invest in that strategic, um, investing the time to thinking about this. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
So really rethinking about recognition. Um, I'll just finish out. So Alex put the link in the chat for everybody. This is one of the best visuals of, you know, this kind. I just love it so much. The other things I'll just point out is that employees felt valued by manager is so valued by the organization. Number one, valued by your managers. Number two, a sense of belonging. Number three. So those that, you know, bingo, right? Like those are all things together, and they're all about relationships. Sense of belonging is about relationships, and that to me is another key component of building and strengthening relationships, even during a time when we're all completely distributed.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm so excited that, you know, that you brought this up and that you shared it, because like when I was looking at it, when Josh sent this to me the other day and I checked it out and I was like, wow. Just like as I was looking at it, you know, like exactly what you said. It doesn't have to be. I'm in so many spaces right now, on the HR side of my job, where people are talking about we can't throw enough money at people to stay, you know, and I don't think that's the, you know, this is showing that that's not the main
Nope.
driver here. That's not the
Nope.
only component. And not even like it's not even showing up there. So I thank you for sharing that. I just think that is huge. And as I'm thinking about this sense of belonging, of course, is something we talk about a lot at Donut, and kind of how we can build stronger relationships. I'm going to bring back my screen share here,
Okay.
um, because we have a couple different. All right, so we've talked about, you know, we've talked about the stress, the disengagement, the burnout. We have a couple different examples of things that may drive disengagement within your organization, things you may have observed, maybe not. And we'll talk a little bit about maybe some different ways that you can address those different things. So I think what I'd like to do is start maybe at like here's something you may have experienced, the individual may have experienced, and then we'll get a little broader, a little bigger picture. So let's start with this one. We're just going to go there. Bad managers. You know, according to at least one survey, 50% of people who responded say, I have left a job because of a bad manager. So I think this is something that probably a lot of people on our chat today have maybe experienced, or they've observed someone else go through this. And you know, this scenario we have over on the left, that's a quote. It might sound familiar to you, at least the top half, right? If you've had a manager that kind of exhibited some of these behaviors. And one thing I'll say, and then Josh, I want to turn it over to you and get your thoughts on how we can approach this situation, right? If we have some managers in our company that we're seeing like their direct reports are struggling, and maybe there's some burnout there because of that, but bad managers can be so impactful. And I've thought about my own experiences with this in the past too. And it's because as a employee, you feel like there is no way for you to change this situation. Sometimes you can feel trapped in that situation because you're just attributing it to that's who this person is. This is who I am. I don't know how to move forward, and I'm not sure how to approach someone to talk about this. So what do you think, Josh? What can we do to prevent, to help managers if we see any managers that are struggling, or if we have a coworker who is, you know, maybe having a tough time with a manager?
Yeah, I mean, the if it's a coworker, I think even just being present and observing and acknowledging, I think is a really just saying, "Hey, I see you. I see what's happening here," and you know, talk through some strategies or just acknowledging. I always encourage my clients to just to take the opportunity and be a professional about it and actually speak up to the particular manager if that's something that you can do. It needs to be at the very least um, an effort made. They may not have that self awareness, and you can bring that to them. And then if that doesn't work, I think a bringing it up like you have here, a skip level with someone who is higher on to say this is difficult for me and I can't do my best work. How would you advise? What should we do about this?
Mhm.
So I think surfacing it, acknowledging it, and addressing it head on are the things that um, I personally have learned to do and try to do better.
Yeah,
And I think it's something that we can all do better. So that would be my kind of uh, minimum viable, like nothing fancy. It just needs to be, hey,
right.
we need to talk.
Yeah. A couple other things too that I'm thinking about because I know, you know, ideally you're in a situation where you can do those things, right? Where you're working in an environment where you feel
Yeah.
like you can come forward and you can say, this isn't working and we need to shift something around. What can we do? But sometimes that's not the case. And if I know
Yeah.
we said we had a lot of people ops, HR people on the call. So, I want to acknowledge on the right here, we have some re-engagement toolkit ideas. So, if you're thinking, how do I help our managers become, better? How do I better set up space for people to feel like they can come forward and say, this isn't working, whether it is directly to their manager or someone else in the organization.
Yep.
There's a few ideas there, surveys and spot checks. I've already seen some questions coming in the Q&A about how do we do these pulse checks? How do we find out how people are doing? And we'll talk a little bit about that. But also facilitating connections between other teams, just because I want to call this one out here. This person said they were able to work cross-functionally on a project that had a lot of visibility. And I just thought that was a really an interesting way that they were kind of saved from feeling so disengaged that they decided to leave, which was that they had an opportunity to work with some other people on the team and get support elsewhere in the
Yeah.
org if in that moment maybe the manager relationship was causing some friction. And I thought that was really cool.
Before we move on, Melanie posted a question in the Q&A that I think is very relevant for um, smaller organizations where the CEO or the co-founder is the manager, or CEO co-founder. The leaders are going to always have an outsized influence. And so, first, number one, Melanie, I see you. I totally get how that's hard, and they feel they're always right. And how do you, and this is, Courtney, I'm going to go to you as an HR professional. How can you help a leader who has, let's say, existed in their professional career where they are being uh, given the signals that they are right, they are the ones in charge, and that's the way they're doing? How do you help them demonstrate that? Because I'm guessing if they understood that what they're saying is negatively affecting the performance of their organization,
Yeah.
they would want to change that. So that's my assumption going into this question. But what do you advise? I mean, what
Right.
how do you do this? There's a serious power dynamic. There's a lot going on here.
Yeah, that's definitely a great question. So thank you, Melanie, for sharing that. I think there's a couple things that come to mind for me. One is honestly, sometimes we have to advocate by leading by example. So I don't know the exact specifics of what may be going on here, but if it's something that's happening in meetings, right, where like people are making suggestions, asking questions, want to do something, and it's kind of like getting shut down. Um, if you have the right relationship here, you might be able to be the person that's facilitating that moment of like, wait, let's hear a little bit more about this and kind of open the door. So I think one thing you can do is you don't have to be at the top to be a leader, right? Like you can lead from bottom up. And so I think that's one thing you can do is model the behavior that you're hoping that your CEO, your execs will adopt. But I know that's not always going to change everything overnight
Yeah.
either. So I also think um, some of the stuff we've talked about here, right? Like leadership lotteries, skip level programs, encouraging your leaders and execs to make time to do those pulse checks themselves. like maybe doing a skip level where a CEO is hearing from people and help them prepare a list of questions that are going to open the door a little bit more for how are things really going? What's not going well? Is everyone going to give a 100% transparent example to like the person at the very top of the company? Probably not. But I think allowing your leaders to hear a little bit more of some of that feedback could be really valuable. Another thing is you've got to develop that relationship too. So I think depending upon what your exact position is within the org and how you interact with and work with the CEO or a co-founder, making that space and time to build your relationship with that person. Some of it could be a little more lightweight, a little more personal, but getting to the place where you do feel comfortable giving them that feedback is super important. And that's something I've had to do in my career as well, is just kind of like getting to know a person. Again, we're talking about that relationship building on a level where I can sit down with them sometimes and say, here's what's going on. This is going to be hard feedback. But I feel it's really important for you to hear it. Is now a good time to talk about it? And kind of it's that idea of like the micro yes, and opening the door where you ask them about, is now a good time to talk about it? Should we do it in a couple days? But getting that yes from them to sort of prepare them for the fact that like, okay, now we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about, some feedback that I'm hearing from within the org that may go against what their perception is of what's actually happening within the organization. So I think sometimes it's about just like being really
Yeah.
honest.
One strategy that I use to deal with difficult executives. Now, granted, I'm a consultant, but I think that's part of this challenge is not being trusted. And so, one of the things I would say is there someone that has the ear of the CEO that the CEO trusts? Because what we're talking about is a difference of understanding around what is real, what is reality. So if this person is a good intermediary, then you can go to them and say, look, this is a real problem. Talk about maybe what that CEO really cares about and how this impacts that. So that would be my
Absolutely.
quick
Yeah.
hit on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Because if, maybe if you're not the person who has the ear, if you're not the person who's built that relationship, that's not something you're going to be able to do overnight. So if there is someone else in the org that you can talk to about that stuff, that's super valuable. I'm looking at time and I want to also talk about some of these other examples, but I see the questions coming in. So we will also we'll continue to address the ones that make sense as we go and still save some time at the end. This is another one that I think like an individual can experience that can be just really a letdown. It can really put you in maybe a negative space at work. So being passed over for a raise or a promotion. So Josh, do you have any examples of times you've heard about this happening, or things that we can do as we're thinking about, okay, we're not going to give the promotion to this person, what can we do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to go right back to this is about recognition and the lack thereof. And if you can't recognize that this person is the person feels that they were recognized, they need to be recognized, and this is one way to reward people and demonstrate that. If it just wasn't a good fit and you are the person making that choice, make sure that make sure you're aware of anybody on the team that may or may not have been interested in this role, and say, this is why. Here's what you need to improve. We value you. I think it's a signal, and that's essentially like it is the anti-signal for the most important thing, which is value from the value being valued from the organization. And you're like, I'm invisible, nothing. I mean, that's
Yeah.
going to be that is a quick exit to the door right there. I'm like, all right, what am I doing here?
Yeah. So how can you build in opportunities from the outset of the decision, basically, to allow someone to still help someone, really, to still feel valued? And so I actually, we talked about recognition, but also love this idea here, which is offering opportunities for more development, greater visibility. Things I've seen people do that I think have worked pretty well is starting this conversation by, acknowledging some of the reasons that maybe they weren't selected for the role, but how are we going to help you get there? So kind of immediately positioning that to, we see that you want to achieve this and that you're excited to do this. And we appreciate that. And we want to partner with you to help you build the skills. So not just, hey, you need to build these skills before we're going to put you to that level, but what can we offer you right now to help you start building those skills, to show that we're still invested in you, even though you weren't chosen this time around for
Right. Let's set you up for success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. No questions on that one. No, I'm just kidding. If anybody has any questions specifically,
we're just like, we could, each one of these slides could be a whole thing into itself. So
yeah, for sure.
let's try to at least get through the slides.
Let's try to get through the slides. No, so this one is, you know, if anyone has ever experienced this, I'm sorry. I know how hard this can be. But team layoffs, and we talked about this earlier, right? Like maybe you were able to not do any of them, which is awesome. But if you were, like, wow, that can be really hard and very heavy. And you know, this quote, this was something I was looking at this one earlier, and you know, we were acting like we were supposed to feel lucky that we still had jobs, but like realistically, what does that actually mean? Now there's a bunch of gaps and extra work that we have to pick up. So if we weren't burnout before, we probably are now. I don't know. What do you think about this one? And there's one of the re-engagement tools that's like huge in my mind, but for you, Josh, what comes to mind in terms of, if you have gone through layoffs, sort of what next to try to keep some kind of morale up?
Yeah, well, so it's not everybody's job or have permission to do this, but the rule is cut once and cut deep, because you don't want everybody looking over their back. And so if you can reassure people that there won't be any more cuts, that's going to relieve, I think it goes right back to that same example, that's going to relieve a lot of stress. And I think a lot of communication around, hey, this just happened. I know this is, I want to check in. This is the reason. What is the, how is it? Don't leave people in the dark, because they're going to make up their own stories. And it is such a morale killer. And if you have to be, wondering if you're going to be next and all that stuff. So I do think that you have to realize that when you do a team layoff, it's not only addressing the people who have to go, but you have to really invest in the people who stayed. So it's not easy for anybody to make this choice, but there has to be a real investment in the people who are staying, and that a real considered strategy around it. And leaders need to understand that. Managers need to understand that that's, if you want the rest of the people who are not laid off to continue doing their work to the best of their ability, or at least better than the bare minimum, then there needs to be a real time and space to address that, because that is it's a traumatic event. I'd say it's corporate trauma.
Oh, I like that phrasing. Very true. The only thing I was going to call out, which you've kind of already touched on, Josh, is just that top one, addressing the elephant in the room, like really asking how people are doing, and not, I've seen examples, right, where people have just not acknowledged it at all, which like we kind of, okay, that's the really bad example. Let's just like, we'll all be hush hush. We won't even address that this is an emotional experience.
Maybe they don't notice if we don't say anything.
Right. But I've also seen, in more ways than one, maybe not even just in a layoffs capacity, but this tendency to ask, how are you doing, as though it's a checklist item, and not really kind of like dig a little deeper to find out how people really are doing, so if you can't leave that for the last 2 minutes of your one-on-one and expect to like really, get to how are people feeling and how is that impacting their work. So that's a big one for me. All right, so this is our last one of these examples, then just to let everyone know where we're going. So we're about 15 minutes to the end, and we have some time set aside for Q&A, but Josh, I also want to talk about sort of your predictions for the future, 2022 and beyond. So before we do that though, let's talk a little bit about, just call the thing what it is, burnout. So I think people sometimes think of burnout as a symptom of, oh, you had a hard he had a hard month, or we passed this person over for a promotion, or we went through a round of layoffs, and so burnout is just a result of this thing. It's temporary and it will pass. But burnout is actually its own disengagement driver when people are experiencing that. And I know I raised my hand earlier and said I've experienced this. I think no shame in being honest, and it's like something you can barely describe, where you're just like, I don't even know why I'm getting up and showing up and doing this work anymore. I just have nothing left in me to sort of put on the table and be productive. um so as we're thinking about burnout, when people are experiencing mass disengagement and their people are hitting this wall, um where do they go from there, right? Like how do they kind of how do they rein it in? How do they actually like start to structure, all right, this is an issue that we're seeing, how do we tackle it?
Yeah, it's we're seeing it. And we need to deal with it. I think that there's sort of the immediate, the short, medium, and long term. It's like, oh, this is happening. Let's, just like the last one, acknowledge it. Say, hey, I see you. Where let's talk about it.
Mhm.
Let's figure it out. And then medium is regular check-ins and saying, what is it? Because like we said, there's a lot of different things that are happening that could be internal, it could be external, it could be personal, it could be relationships, it could be managers. And so we have to uncover that. And that's not easy in a larger organizations, but it is such a critical piece. I mean, this is the reason that we have our organizational charts and structures. It's, how many people are you managing, and you need to check in with those folks, and because that is the job. And so there's, to me, it's and then establishing more rituals around this in the long
Mhm.
term. Um, the like you said, rosebud thorn,
Yeah.
is that's a really important check-in. So, and I think we're going to get into this with some of my predictions, but it's the allowing space for the humans and the emotions, in our highly distributed worlds. So that's kind of, I'll lean into that.
All right. Yeah, so you're sort of maybe starting on almost a personal level, right? Like managers, starting on a personal level and kind of unpacking like what are the different stressors that my people are feeling, bubbling that up,
Mm,
surfacing where those things are happening, and then starting to think about how do we separate what are the stressors that they're feeling.
mm,
Again, I guess bringing it back to what we said at the beginning, that we actually have some control over, or that we are somehow impacting as an organization, and what pieces can we then extrapolate from that to make better. And maybe it is some of these things. Maybe it is like, hey, I just realized no one's ever taking a lunch break. Maybe we should prioritize that and like actually encourage that behavior.
or
Or
vacations.
Right, or vacations, huge, right? Like, oh my gosh, the last year and then coming into this year, we had to be like, take vacations, people. Like, it is so important for you to actually prioritize mental health.
Yeah.
I want to remind everyone, please submit your questions in the Q&A, because we're coming up on time quickly, and so we're going to talk a little bit really quickly about sort of predictions and what you see being super important for the future to address some of these issues. But we want to answer your questions, so thank you for dropping these in the Q&A in the chat, and keep those coming. So I'm gonna jump out of sharing my screen, because I don't think I really have much else to show right now besides a picture of people imagining a more engaged workforce. So, so Josh, what are your predictions? I know you just talked a little bit about like being more
Yeah.
holistic, being more human,
Yeah.
acknowledging that. Where do we go?
Well, there was a lot of questions, in the from folks who registered ahead of time around the distributed workforce, and that is the other factor that is, potentially accelerating some of this challenge, because we don't know how to work in this way. We don't have all the tools.
Mhm.
Um, yes, we have Slack and email and Zoom, but that's not what I mean. Emotional and, work tools, sort of like the thing, ways to work. And one of the big challenges that we're facing, and we will face for the next 10 years, is the disintegration or the degradation of relationships.
Mhm.
Because even if you're in a hybrid workplace, you're going to see these people less. And those interstitial moments are no longer as occur as often. And it's those moments that help you understand who these people are and understand the context and really get to know who they are. And so, to me, the number one most important thing that an organization needs to do is invest in building and strengthening relationships. It is only those relationships. One of the things I say in the book is that relationships are the synapses of culture. And so, if we don't have those relationships, and I'm talking about more than just your immediate team. You gotta really have an excuse to meet some of these other people, and I write about it in the chapter on rituals. And that's just going to be such an important, crucial piece. And if an organization doesn't do this, doesn't train, skill up, invest the time and energy in that, then you're going to see a deflation of work product, and no one's going to know why. And my prediction is it's almost certainly going to be about teams, how they work together in relationships. And if we don't have those, then we're not putting that, investing in the culture and the energy of the organization, because one of the most important things is the relationships you have with humans. And so that's going to be a really big challenge.
Yeah. Um, I'm glad you called out, that some of the questions people had submitted ahead of time were specifically around, like, we're distributed, we're hybrid, we're fully remote. Um, we've all been doing that for a while. A lot of people have. And, I'm of course going to mention Donut here. I'm not trying to plug Donut, but genuinely, I think a lot about, as you mentioned earlier on, Josh, that we try to help people build those rituals in kind of a lightweight, I don't want to say easy. I mean, it's easy to set up, but the thing that can be hard, right, is like, you got to get buy-in. You probably need to be doing it if you want other people to do it, right? So there is that element of like, okay, how do we actually make this part of our culture? But I like to think of Donut as sort of the nudge or a catalyst to be intentionally thinking about space
Yep.
for connection and relationship building. Donut as an application isn't going to 10x your relationship between you and another person in the org overnight, but it can open the door. It can open the door to helping you get introduced to people across the organization, and make that space. And one example of this, just because it came out of a customer conversation in the last week, and I was just super excited to hear about this, was a company that I was chatting with that was using Donut to run lotteries, where it was selecting one person from the people ops team to randomly get matched with someone else in the org that they likely wouldn't really have one-on-one conversations with. And they're globally distributed. They're all working remotely. And it was that facilitator. Like, it just opened the door for them to be able to check in with these people in a face-to-face, quote unquote, way, where they could actually, see their nonverbal cues and ask them how they're doing, outside of just doing like a survey or a pulse check, and get introduced to these people in a way that they don't work with them on a daily basis. So it was that intentionality of setting that up.
I would say that I would add to that, it if not explained and communicated as to why this is important, it's going to feel more like a burden.
Yeah.
And it's I got emails to answer. Like, I don't have time for this, and that's
Yeah.
a common feedback that I get around all rituals. And so it's really the human part of this system is, hey, why are we doing this? This is important, and providing those opportunities for folks to express maybe some early signs of burnout, checking in. And I want to hear from you. I want to hear what you're doing and what's going on. So that's, I think, my ad for that piece of work.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Got to articulate, like, what is the purpose of this, and why are we prioritizing it, and why are we making time space for it? We got a great question that's anonymous, but someone had mentioned that at work they told their bosses that hybrid had been more exhausting and draining than being either fully in person or fully remote. And they received some pushback to the comment and said this was, being used to justify coming back to fully in person and just eliminate hybrid and remote work, which it sounds like the person who wrote in did not mean for that to be the way this was taken. Do you have any suggestions or ideas for how else someone can phrase like hybrid is hard without it threatening remote component and saying like we just need to come back to the office? Because that's not what the intent was behind that.
It's a whole new way of working. It's a whole new way of working, and we've never worked this way before, and we need to learn to. And it can't just be so the work. So at the beginning, you mentioned this, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was like, oh, look at all this time I have to do my work, and I'm so productive. That type of work is that individual work, the answering the emails, the writing the thing, whatever you're working on, that it's great because you don't get interrupted. But
Mhm.
how to schedule and manage the time and all that stuff, this is all new skills that we need to learn and provide that space for. And I think what hard is it, hey, this is hard. What is that's vague. I think you need to be more specific. I don't have as much energy
Mm.
to because to do these things. I can't work my best self, and coming back to work is not necessarily going to be the way to fix that. We need to figure out as an organization how people are feeling and where they get their energy from and how we can provide that, because I think hybrid can work. I think hybrid is a good solution. It's just not working in this way, and that is the number one misinterpretation of assessment of hybrid. It's like you're either hybrid or you're not, and you're like, how? Like there's a thousand shades of hybrid that we can talk about, and so thinking through what it means, it is an entirely new way of working. And yes, leaders are like, fuck, can we just get back to work? Like, can we just get back to work? But no, you're too deep in it now. So that's what I got. That's my first. I have my first hit for you.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. We're coming up on time. That was an awesome question, and a really hard one to answer too, because this is so different than anything we've done before. And I think being able to articulate like what's feeling hard for you, and maybe get together with some other people in the organization too, and find out what's feeling hard for them. Because sometimes I don't want to say it's not so much like strength in numbers, but strength in being able to articulate what the different problems are that people are feeling.
Yep.
But I want to make sure to pull this slide up because I know everyone's got busy days, right? We're all super busy these days, but we've got some resources. As we mentioned a couple times, we're going to be following up with the slides and the recording. But these are some of the leave behind resources that we'll have for you there. If you want to reach out to us at Donut, you can reach out to us at support@donut.ai. You can always try Donut for free. Justina, I saw that you had a question specifically about Donut. I think Alex is going to chat you an answer, but also you can reach out to us at support@donut.ai, and we'd be happy to kind of walk you through some ideas for how you could use Donut. And then also we've got some great Mondays resources. I know some people had specific questions around cues and rituals. So you can go to Josh's website, and there's a couple other links here too. I do highly recommend Josh's Great Mondays book. I have a copy. I did this like it's on my bookshelf, but I'm not in front of my bookshelf. But anyway, thank you again so much, Josh. This has been a great conversation. Always appreciate having your brain power.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. I appreciate it.
All right, well, everyone, I hope you have a wonderful day, and we will be in touch with follow-up resources. And of
Happy
course,
Halloween.
happy Halloween. Yes, thank you. Bye.